So I recently listened to a podcast that featured Sam Harris and Russell Brand, and they had an interesting exchange that I'd like to provide some comments on. Now, just so you guys know, I've been a fan of Sam Harris for a long time, so my bias is definitely towards him. So just keep that in mind as you watch this video.
Worst case is there are people who are as good, who are as moral and as ethical and as committed to the well-being of themselves and others as you and I are, who still go in and shoot up schools and kill everybody and hope to die in the process because they think they can get into paradise that way and get into. So when members of the Taliban went into a school in Pakistan and killed, I think it was 137 kids, and burned their teacher alive in front of them, you have to ask yourself, well, do you think all members of the Taliban who did this, and then all of those in the Taliban who endorsed this, were all just psychopaths or mentally ill? No. If you listen to what they're saying, if you listen to what they believe, if you read the texts that they think are the verbatim word of the creator of the universe, it all falls into place. This is perfectly rational behavior given the requisite beliefs, and that is what is so horrible about this kind of dogmatism.
But that, even that process, that sort of extreme example of the execution of children in schools, it would be sort of an elective reading of even that particular doctrine. There would be particular passages you go, oh, here's the passage with that sort of.
Not so much, unfortunately.
Well, there's loads of stuff that's like live a peaceful life of devotion.
Not loads of stuff. Have you read the Quran? Have you read the Quran cover to cover?
Of course, I bloody well haven't.
Yeah, okay, but
I've barely got through these notes for this interview, Sam. I'm doing this thing on the fly.
You can
do
it. It's a short book.
I've checked out. Like my general feeling is that the Quran wholly is like most religious scripture. The intention is to create a social environment where people are benevolent and cohesive.
So here we have a disagreement about what the doctrine of Islam is actually about, and Sam is arguing basically the point of Islam is to get into paradise, and you can do that by sacrificing yourself as a soldier for Allah. But Russell doesn't want to seem to acknowledge that that is basically what is preached, and he wants to emphasize, positive parts of the doctrine. But when asked if he has ever read the Quran or knows anything about it, he readily admits that he doesn't, but then continues to argue that it's not about what Sam is suggesting, which doesn't make any sense because if you just admitted you haven't read it, you literally can't know what the text is about.
The schools.
I just want to acknowledge that whatever
my personal reading,
whatever your reading is, most people most of the time think that the afterlife is a literal place you go after you die, that consciousness survives the death of the body. And in the Judeo-Christian tradition,
I know,
especially the Christian and the Islamic tradition, it really matters whether you believe the right thing or not. I mean, in fact, this life doesn't matter at all, and that's what's so corrosive about this belief system.
But
So this exchange is certainly entertaining because Sam is explaining to Russell that most people, most of the time, if they're religious, believe that there is an afterlife that their soul will drift to. And Russell thinks that, I think Russell thinks that Sam is being condescending towards him and trying to be more intellectual than him because Russell slips in this commentary about, oh, yeah, I do know about that stuff, mate. Like, I might not know about Islam, but at least I know about Judaism. And Christianity. But really what Sam is doing is just explaining something. I don't think he's actively trying to be condescending.
Of the dominant culture. What interests me, Sam Harris, is power and the powerful.
Okay.
And for me, I'm interested in who gets to decide who the other is. Who gets to decide by what metric rationalism and religion is evaluated. And it seems to me that the kind of violence that's focused on in a lot of your work is the violence of desperate people. Desperate and possibly subjugated people. And I would say to I know that you don't do this, but I want you to educate me on this. To dismiss the colonial aspect, the sort of economic aspect, the occupation of Middle Eastern countries, the historical aspect. I mean, for me, it seems like how can you conduct that extraction? How can you divorce those different types of violence? They seem to me to be part of one narrative.
Well, I can do it very simply because you have just to dissect out the variable of colonialism or oppression from the outside. You have examples of people who have been oppressed, as oppressed as any other people, who don't resort to this kind of violence because they don't have the same belief structure, right? So take that. Here's an almost perfect scientific experiment. You have Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims living in the same occupied territories, right? Now, who was blowing that before the Israelis put up the wall? Who was blowing themselves up in pizza parlors and discotheques, right? It was 99.9% Muslim, right? It was not Christian. You have Coptic Christians in Egypt being murdered by their Muslim neighbors by suicide bombings, who don't resort to their own suicide bombings in return, right? The beliefs matter. The details matter.
Why do you fetishize your antagonism towards that particular type of violence?
It's not a fetish.
Of course, that
just...
violence exists in the context of a far more potent opponent's violence.
No. Okay.
Like we can't talk about Palestinian violence and Christian Palestinian violence without saying not talking about history.
No, of course we can because
we can.
Because you can
Why
have.
Why would we though?
Because,
and isn't that the very
because
problem?
Tomorrow morning, someone in Orange County will be converted to this belief system and want to fight in the name of this cause, and it's purely a matter of belief.
So Russell Brand certainly knows how to be entertaining. I'm not so sure he knows how to make a good argument. Sam basically just explains here that you can discount the factors of colonialism in explaining the behavior of jihadists because the people who have been oppressed equally as much as any other people in the Middle East don't behave in the same way simply because their beliefs differ. If you're a Christian Palestinian, you probably don't believe that blowing yourself up in a market square is going to send you to the afterlife.
What should we call that thing? Ow, my teeth!
It's reason.
Did Russell Brand just say, "Ow, my teeth"? He must have been gesturing a little too vigorously and hit himself on his microphone or something. I don't know.
And my concern with religious fundamentalism, and not all religions equally, but my concern is that these are the beliefs that are held most closely. They're the least negotiable. I mean, they're by definition non-negotiable. These are my faith-based beliefs. Are the beliefs that if you challenge them, that will by whatever evidence or whatever argument, I will take that as a personal insult, and I will want to resort immediately to violence or the threat of violence.
Yeah.
I will want blasphemy laws. I will want to pass a law at the UN that will give you jail time if you say the wrong thing about my holy book.
So Sam is trying to explain to Russell why he prioritizes or if he focuses so much on Islamism or jihadist extremism or whatever you want to call it. Basically, he focuses on it, or he prioritizes that in his work because people hold these beliefs so closely that it almost, it makes conversation non-negotiable. And Russell Brand has continually asked why does Sam focus so much on religious belief and especially Islam? And this seems to be a perfectly good reason as to why you would. It's because these beliefs are held so closely and are so important to people that they're willing to go to extreme lengths in order to defend them. So I don't understand why Russell thinks that Sam's prioritization of this is out of whack.
My own spiritual pursuits have led me to the point where I have a basic optimistic view of humanity. My own personal experience with Muslims has led me to believe that Islam is essentially a positive thing. Essentially a positive thing.
But that's a bad way to take its temperature.
Now here, Russell makes an interesting argument by saying basically that Muslims in his, that he's had experience with are good because of their religion. And the argument against that is people are good in spite of their religion. And this is something I think that Christopher Hitchens pointed out many times probably. But it's not because of the religion that most Muslims are peaceful. It's in spite of the religion.
Right, because how many Muslims have you had a personal experience with? I'll grant you.
Well,
I'll be
I know,
very
but you're
generous.
taking the temperature on the basis of bloody suicide bombers.
Well,
and
no,
like
no. I'm taking the temperature on the basis of the actual doctrine that makes sense of this behavior, and also
or aspects of the doctrine. The aspects of the doctrine.
Now, again, we're at this point in the conversation where Russell's already admitted he doesn't know about the aspects of the doctrine, and Sam is saying, here are the aspects of the doctrine that explain why these people are behaving this way. It's a little befuddling.
Give Dick Cheney a magic wand. Dick Cheney, the prototypical evil mustache-twirling bastard who gave us the Iraq War and is as demonized on the left as anyone. What would he have done if he had the power, just to make life in the Middle East and in Afghanistan any way he wanted it?
It's stated. It doesn't need. We do not need to conjecture. They said we want to remove the ability of our opponents to respond. It's in the public sphere. That's what they said, Cheney and Bush. We want to annihilate the possibility of response.
Let's go a little further. Let's go a little further.
So Bush and Cheney wanted to annihilate the opponent's ability to respond. Well, that sounds pretty reasonable, but Russell translates this as tyranny, and I just love the way he emphasizes that. It makes his argument more persuasive to those who are convinced by those tactics. But for me, it's not persuasive at all, because when you say you're going to remove your opponent's ability to respond, who are we talking about with the opponents? I'm pretty sure Dick and Bush, or Bush and a Dick, were not talking about oppressing the people of the Middle East. They were talking about terrorists with weapons that they would like to neutralize.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi impose on everyone else. He's told us explicitly, because he tried the experiment in Syria and Iraq. We know exactly how he wants to live, and he wants others to live. It is 7th century theocratic barbarism. And there's no doubt about that. It is fornicators, is homosexuals thrown from rooftops, and fornicators with their throats slit.
One thing that surely we can agree on is that what the second guy whose name I don't know, tellingly,
the head of ISIS,
is irrelevant. And
he's
what
not irrelevant.
Dick Cheney
he's the head of ISIS.
The head of ISIS is irrelevant.
But the metric by which we evaluate them is a distinct metric drawn from another narrative, and we might say, "Oh, bloody hell, women dressing like that," or whatever. We can't. I don't think we're in a position to make those kind of decisions.
Of course we are. Of course we are. You don't think you're in a position?
Why do you think that their narrative should adhere to our template?
Well, first of all, so you imagine that most women forced to wear a burqa.
I don't know about forced. And my experience
and
my conversation
they're all being forced.
has been that it's more that we.
The good old "there's no moral truth" argument. We can't say anything about other societies and whether they're immoral or moral. Who are we to judge? My favorite.
The idea that it just may be as good a solution for the how to maximize human well-being to put half the population in bags from the moment that, and not let them learn to read. I mean, now I'm taking Afghanistan. I'm taking the local case of Afghanistan under the Taliban, and it may well fall back. I mean, it's actually Afghanistan currently as well. You're talking about women who have almost the worst possible life on planet Earth. I mean, we're talking about maternal mortality rates that are off the charts. You're talking about illiteracy that you have to go back 200 years in the West to find that level of illiteracy. I think this is precisely the kind
of reasoning that's used to justify the bombing and commercial colonization of those territories.
Yes, Russell. Our concern for women in the Middle East and their freedom is just a pretext for wanting to come into their land and just take all of their shit.
They're not like us. They treat women different from us. I don't think we're in a position to make those judgments.
Okay, so then tell me how you would react to this. I have two daughters, and if I were thinking the way you were thinking about this issue, What if I thought it would be a great idea to have a cultural exchange program where I just sent my daughters over to Afghanistan to live with a Taliban family? So rather than go to summer school here and get prepared to go to an Ivy League college
Sam,
or whatever it is,
all your
I send them
experiments,
to live with the Taliban.
You don't need to explain all this to me. I see
Okay.
where you're going.
Okay,
I'm not 9 years old.
No, but
Sam, darling.
But tell
listen,
but,
my
no,
point
but you
is
got to
this,
answer it.
all of
Answer
your
it.
thought
Now, one thing Russell will continuously do throughout this podcast is trivialize Sam's thought experiments, not realizing that these are useful tools that you use to think through scenarios. So
you are an American intellectual.
No, but I can
in
introduce you.
2018.
But okay, but just take a few facts on board here. I can introduce you to women who of whatever shade of brown skin you require.
I have no requirements. That's one of the beautiful things about me.
Who have grown up in these cultures, who will say exactly what I'm saying about the consequences of compulsory
veiling. I could introduce you to women of a variety of views that would say the contrary.
No, they wouldn't say that. No,
it's a practice of personal subjugation. It's the same as doing yoga or exercise. It's a way of refining your consciousness.
But you're
ameliorating.
drawing the wrong lesson here.
No, I'm not drawing the wrong lesson.
I'm back to the no, because you're just missing a few facts. If you have those two people have a conversation, if you take someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali or Sarah Haider, who runs the Ex-Muslims of North America, right? And you have her talk to someone like Linda Sarsour, the hijabi icon of the Women's March, right?
Yes,
Darling of the left now, who's actually a closet theocrat and quite a nefarious person when you get her talking about religion. I mean, she will not admit that life for women in Saudi Arabia is bad by comparison at all with life for women in the West.
America should stop having such complicit trade relationships with them then.
I'll agree with you there. So, but if you have two women of this sort talk, right? One who has taken off the hijab for reasons of not wanting to wear it and wanting to live in a system where she's free not to wear it, and one who says, I'm wearing it purely as an expression of my own religious faith, and it's just pure female empowerment. If you let that conversation proceed, you'll see that this side has to lie endlessly about the actual doctrines, about why most people, most women, most of the time are wearing this. It's being forced upon them. I mean, if you talk about the misuse of power, you're talking about. I mean, take the perfect case that sounds like it's a thought experiment, but it actually happened. You take the religious police in Mecca who wouldn't let the girls who were burning alive in a dormitory be rescued because they weren't wearing their veils.
So this podcast goes on for about 2 hours. I've only exposed you, the viewer, to a small slice of it. And despite all my poking fun at Russell Brand, he's actually very well spoken. He's very personable and funny, and has a pretty expansive vocabulary, and does a good job expressing himself. And there's a lot of things that him and Sam actually agree upon. But for the purpose of entertainment, I just focused on those more contentious points. But I would highly advise that you go and listen to the whole thing, give each person a fair hearing, and hats off to the both of them. But this has been Kellen Riley speaking. Thank you for listening.